네, 그럼 지금부터 BWB 블록체인 위크인 부산 2022의 2부 행사를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 자, 2부의 포문은요, FTX의 샘 뱅크먼프리드 대표님이 준비하고 계신데요. 아쉽게도 오늘 한국까지 오실 스케줄이 되지 않으셔서 오늘 샘 대표님은 영상으로 만나보도록 하겠습니다.
Hey, my name is Sam Bankman-Fried. I'm the CEO and co-founder of FTX. First of all, a huge congratulations to the city of Busan on a really successful launch of Busan Blockchain Week. And more generally, we're just extremely excited about what we see going on in Busan and in Korea more generally. Really, really excited about the, prospects for the rollout of a regulatory sandbox, in the area of really a major global hub of digital assets in Busan, and of a vision where it is a major driver of global innovation. And we couldn't be more excited to to play a part in that. We have seen the country of Korea more generally be a huge catalyst for innovation, really in a number of industries over the years, but in the digital asset industry as well. It has always been one of the largest sources of products in the area, one of the largest sources of liquidity, and we're really excited to see regulators and industry working hand in hand to create an environment that can protect consumers, that can safeguard against financial risks, but that at the same time can allow for hopefully a huge amount of innovation and financial growth. We would be very, very excited to be a part of that in Korea and to be a part of that in Busan. And we've seen regulatory sandboxes used to great effect in a number of jurisdictions. I think that when they really do have the backing of the local regulators and the enthusiastic backing of them, we've seen them, be able to provide a petri dish for, venues and tokens to operate, to grow, and for regulators to get comfortable with the space and explore and to learn, and ultimately develop, powerful regulatory frameworks that can do a really good job of balancing the needs for customer protection with the ability to help really spur growth and innovation, in an area. In terms of where, we see regulation and policy right now, it has been quite a mess globally in the digital asset space. We've been living in a regime over the last few years where each country has had a go-it-alone perspective, because that we have ended up getting licensed separately in a large number of different jurisdictions. And our licensure, in many cases, has no relationship between these different jurisdictions, very little passportability between them. And, that's something that we can deal with. We have been dealing with it. But it creates a pretty large barrier to entry in the ecosystem, because it means that if you really want to be able to compete, you have to be operating, simultaneously in many jurisdictions, and it means you have to be licensed simultaneously in many jurisdictions. It's a huge, huge compliance overhead. And it also means that regulators have to figure this out separately in each instance. What we've seen, I think, missing the most has been for, major countries, major jurisdictions in the ecosystem to really take the lead, build out a digital asset policy, a regulatory framework, share that with the rest of the world, bring a bunch of nations together, and create some sort of passporting regime where you can both make it practical to operate globally, but at the same time make sure that regulators who have thought most carefully and thoughtfully about crypto policy are able to effectively provide the various insights that they've gotten to the whole ecosystem. And I think that that's a key part of what we are excited about, and what we would love to see globally going forward. Within the United States, which is where I've spent a lot of my time, over the last year, working with policymakers, regulators, on building out a crypto framework. What we've seen is, in some senses, a microcosm of what we've seen globally, where there are a number of different regulatory bodies within the United States, each one of which has been working independently and in many places constructively on crypto regulatory frameworks. And we've seen huge progress over the last year. I think a year and a half ago, there was very little impetus from almost any of the relevant bodies in the United States to actually put pen to paper and start to build out a framework. There's a lot of talk about it being a desired outcome, but very little action. We're now in a place where there are bills being drafted by Congress that have a real chance of passing in the next year that would create regulatory frameworks, where we have multiple regulators who seem on the cusp of being ready to start to license and oversee significant parts of the industry, where we're starting to see a consensus amongst different policymakers that it is really important to have regulatory oversight, federal regulatory oversight for the ecosystem, and simultaneously that it's important to do it in a way that makes sense for the industry, that makes sense for the asset class, and where you have real real growth coming to the U.S. economy. And I'm excited to see some of that reach out to other jurisdictions as well. Including Korea, and I think that Busan taking the lead in the country of Korea it's really exciting. It can really help spur growth, because what we've seen in place after place after place is that the core blocker on regulatory frameworks is not so much opposition to them as it is inaction. That the biggest thing that ends up fighting against progress is just no one taking that step forward and going out on a limb and doing what needs to be done. And so I think like having a really significant player in the broader Korean landscape take that step forward, offer themselves out to be a regulatory sandbox, to start to license, to start to oversee the industry, can really set the tone correctly for the country, for the region, and frankly for the world. Because what we're hearing from regulator after regulator after regulator is they're very interested in which nations are getting this right, in which nations have made a lot of progress here. They're very interested in learning and adapting based on successful models. There's a lot of hunger out there for positive solutions here. And so we're just extremely excited to see how this ends up, and hopefully for Busan to end up being that example of what happened when a country got crypto policy right, when a country really took charge of this and was able to give that customer protection, that safety, that comfort, that oversight, while still acting in a way that the industry is able to come on shore. So that's, at the end of the day, the vision that I am most excited about. And I am very excited about it. I think that we will hopefully be able to get there in a number of jurisdictions. And Korea would be one that I would be most excited about. So really encouraged by everything that we're seeing here. In terms of the biggest advice, other than starting to take that step forward, don't feel like you have to bite off everything at once. You can do things iteratively. That realistically speaking, that's how things are most likely to work. But the most important things are that you pay attention to where are the large sources of volume of liquidity in the space, and what does it take to get the bulk of it. Nothing has to be perfect here, but the sort of largest factors are spot markets for tokens, stable coins, and futures contracts on cryptocurrencies. Those three pieces make up the bulk of the regulatory policy decisions that have to be made, and giving clarity on those three areas would give clarity on most of what needs to happen, and it would really allow industry to thrive, and it would allow a sandbox to really capture most of what was going on in the industry. So I would focus on getting a regime that has at least temporary solutions in place for those three things. And, you can tack more on later. And, you can obviously build out the sophistication of those over time as well. It doesn't need to all come at once. But, what you need is just to end up in a place at the end of the day where, where one way or another, you do have a way for the industry to operate those products. And if you have a way to do it, that, frankly speaking, is enough for industry to move forward. And that's enough to give oversight and protection to the major pieces, to the major sources, of potential risk. And that if you're missing one of those three key components, it's going to be hard for it to be a really sort of bona fide, sandbox and test. We've seen that trap in a few places where, there is a sort of temporary regime put in place for Bitcoin and Ethereum against dollar spot markets, but it doesn't allow for stablecoins. It doesn't distinguish between different types of stablecoins. It doesn't have oversight of them. And it also doesn't allow for derivatives contracts. And because of that, it ends up missing where most of the market is. And you just don't see the adoption. You don't see the real stress testing. You don't see the learning on either side. But I think in places where we have seen those three things addressed, that really does provide a framework that can be extended to most of the industry. The last thing that I'll say is, and this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine, is that when it comes to suitability and, sophistication of prospective investors, I pretty strongly think that it matters that, we make sure that people are suitable for the investments that they're making. And that the core test for that, that makes sense, is a knowledge-based test. And what I mean by that is, if there is, a prospective investor which is interested in, investing in some cryptocurrency-related product, that the core test that they should have to go through is a proof that they understand that product, that they understand the mechanics, that they understand the risks, they understand the most that they could reasonably lose, that they have acknowledged that, and not just with a checkbox, but by taking a quiz demonstrating that they really do know the answers to those questions. And that's what it means to be a suitable prospective investor for a product, rather than using a wealth or income-based test where, on the one hand, you have some very wealthy investors who frankly are not sophisticated enough that it makes sense for them to be accessing some of these products. And at the other side, you have a lot of extremely sophisticated lower income prospective investors who get locked out of the new financial ecosystem, and you end up saying that only the wealthy can grow their wealth. And so I think that using that using wealth-based tests really doesn't accomplish either policy goal here, and that the powerful thing to do is instead to think about things in terms of the sophistication, the understanding, the knowledge, of the user, and making sure that they know what they're getting themselves into, and that should be sort of the core, customer suitability standard that users are held up to. Anyway, those are some thoughts on on the current regulatory landscape. I really do think that things are getting better and getting better quickly. I think that we've seen enormous progress even over the last few months towards establishing global regulatory frameworks and national regulatory frameworks in a lot of places. I am really optimistic that over the next year we're going to actually see regimes that work start to be rolled out in a lot of places, and that's going to change everything. So thanks to everyone who's been pushing for it on that. Huge thanks to to the country of Korea and to the city of Busan in particular for being a real thoughtful leader in this area. We are extremely excited to work constructively with policymakers, with regulators, with governments, national and local, to build out the future of finance. And I'll just leave with one final thought, which is it's important that at the end of the day we don't forget why we're doing this in the first place, what the point of all of this is. And as much as there can be a lot of interest and excitement about the assets and the pricing, at the end of the day, it's the use cases that matter and that are hopefully going to drive, large value to the world. And when you look at a lot of the settlement failures that we've seen in finance over the last few years, everything from the day that retail traders were shut down in the United States because volatility got too high and settlement risk got too high, the LME nickel fiasco, to Archegos, to a number of other cases where we saw meltdowns that really at their core were the result of sort of unclear settlement between different parties, that using blockchain based assets could clean a lot of that up, and could really create clean, clear, straightforward global financial settlement that works intuitively, and that massively reduces risk for everyone involved, increases economic efficiency. That's what I'm most excited for. That's what I'm optimistic we'll see. Digital assets end up playing a huge role in going forward. Anyway, thank you to everyone for listening. Thanks for hosting this, and thanks for taking the lead in the area.
네, 영상으로나마 참가해주신 샘 뱅크먼프리드 대표님 다시 한번 감사드립니다. 내년에는 부산에서 만나뵐 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다.